Welcome to the second part of Chapter 9. In the first part, we discussed some different communication channels. Here, we'll focus on electronic communication channels. Electronic communication channels include video conferencing like Zoom or FaceTime or Microsoft Teams or any other platform that enables you to communicate with someone and also see their video. Phones, phone calls or phone conference calls, email, text, instant messenger, all of those are examples of electronic communication. Electronic communication channels are very prevalent in today's work environment, and they have some very significant advantages. Electronic communication is very fast, instantaneous. You hit send, and a few seconds later, the message appears in your recipient's inbox. It is very low cost once the infrastructure is put in place. It is much cheaper than the ways we used to communicate in the past, where we had to rely on the postal service and we had to pay for postage. It allows you to communicate to a geographically dispersed group. You do not need to be in the same country or in the same time zone or in the same city with the people with whom you choose to communicate, thanks to electronic communication. You can, of course, broadcast your message to many people at once with a single message, right? An email can go to multiple recipients. You have much greater capacity for storage, so you can retrieve old messages that were exchanged as a documentation. And you can also communicate asynchronously. For example, you may record a lecture for students to view at a later time. You can send an email for someone to view whenever they have a moment. If you work with someone at a different time zone, for example, I'm working with someone in Taiwan. There's a 12-hour time difference. When my workday is over, I can send my work over to my counterpart in Taiwan. For her, the workday is just beginning, and she can continue working on our project, which allows for almost 24-hour productivity. And a lot of companies are taking advantage of this asynchronous capability of electronic communication. And so clearly, electronic communication allows organizations to save a lot of money, save a lot of time, allows people to communicate with each other without having to displace themselves and incur the costs, financial and time cost of traveling. So clearly, electronic communication is very advantageous and enables us to do lots of things within organizations more efficiently, more effectively, and with lower cost. But of course, electronic communication also has some disadvantages. A key disadvantage is that most electronic communications are not very rich channels of communications, which means the emotional component of the message is very often lost. This lower richness can lead to miscommunication. It also creates a situation in which it is much harder for people to build reciprocity and trust because they are never meeting face to face and they cannot really get to know the counterparts with whom they are working. Of course, electronic communication also allows people to exchange more informal messages and bypass the organizational hierarchy, which is not always bad, but can be. Electronic communication can impose a linear way of thinking because we are typically communicating one-on-one and we don't have this benefit of brainstorming that we might be able to enjoy when we are working in a large group. Because electronic communication lacks that emotional component, it can dehumanize the workplace and create unrealistic expectations of employees. And of course, electronic communication can create a situation of communication overload, right? Where I receive emails and letters and my phone is ringing and my cell phone is dinging because I just received a message. And it could create a situation of communication overload where people are experiencing a challenge to balance work and life, especially because electronic communication makes us available 24/7, which tends to blur the lines between when does work end and my personal life begin. And this expectation that we be available at all times, or because we work with individuals at other countries in different time zones, we need to be available very early at night, very early in the morning or very late at night. This can also create this challenge to balance work and life. And these are some of the challenges that are associated with electronic communication. And if you want to pause the video here and look at the clip that I put on your As You Learn site about work-life balance and how electronic media makes that more challenging for today's workers. Another way in which we use communication in organizations is for persuasion, to persuade other people to go along with the course of action that we want to pursue, or to support us in a new endeavor, or to simply engage in the tasks that we want them to engage in. Of course, when we want to try to persuade other people, our own credibility also matters. How do we establish credibility? One way to establish credibility is through our own expertise. What have we done? What's our track record? That helps us establish our expertise and makes other people perceive us as more trustworthy. They are more likely to be willing to open themselves up to being influenced by us. Another important variable that helps us persuade other people is providing rational and objective arguments. We talked about this when we talked about decision making and how very often organizations make decisions that are driven by data analysis. These are decisions that seek to base themselves on a rational analysis of objective data. And so rational persuasion is a very frequently used persuasive technique. It is extremely effective both top down and bottom up. If I want to persuade my manager about something, I might benefit greatly from using rational persuasion, and I might be able to influence my manager even though there is a power differential between us. So rational persuasion is a soft influence strategy that we use to try to persuade other people. Of course, emotional elements also matter. Very frequently, leaders try to appeal to their followers' emotions and inspire them to engage in tasks that will benefit the organizational goals. And so emotional elements can also act as soft influence strategies, inspirational appeal, trying to inspire people to go along with what we're asking them to do, because we are appealing to their emotions, right? We're trying to appeal to their emotions to inspire them to support us. Those are soft influence tactics. Rational persuasion, emotional appeal, or inspirational appeal. Hard influence tactics are those that are likely to be used by people who actually have the power to force their interests or their desired outcomes on the people they're trying to persuade. Hard influence tactics include exchange. For example, if you do this for me, I do that for you. Or pressure, threat. Coalition building is also a hard influence tactic where people come together and build a coalition to get their interests across. Right? Coalition building, the prime example in organizations of coalition building are labor unions, where people join a labor union so that they have more power as a result of working together to try to get their needs met. And so soft tactics are quite different from hard tactics. We are more likely to use hard tactics if we have the power to use them. It's very ineffective to try to use threat or pressure when you're at the bottom of the organizational totem pole. But soft tactics can also be used top down, not just bottom up. And so soft tactics can be very effective even for those who have a lot of power in organizations, and especially for those who do not have the power. We will revisit influence strategies when we talk about power within organizations in the final block of this semester. Counseling or coaching is another very frequently used communication strategy in organizations where supervisors or managers or even team leaders use counseling to communicate with their employees. Here we're looking at counseling more from the perspective of coaching. The objective of coaching or counseling is to correct performance problems before they escalate. We want to address performance issues, underperformance or mistakes, as quickly as possible. This is similar to the idea of progressive discipline that we discussed in the chapter on motivation, where we want to try to correct employee behaviors and teach them more desirable behaviors, but avoid punishment. And so counseling and coaching can help us correct performance problems before they escalate and actually require disciplinary action. Counseling can also greatly motivate employees towards more effective performance. If the coaching process teaches me how to do my job better, how to avoid mistakes, how to be more efficient or more effective in managing my time, I will be more motivated. Counseling and coaching can also provide guidance, not just in task-specific, job-specific areas, but also in terms of general career counseling. If I get to know my employees well and I know who in my team wants to pursue career progression and who doesn't, I can counsel or coach those employees as to the steps they need to take in order to accomplish their goals. If you want to climb the organizational ladder and become a manager, then here are some things you need to take. You need to step up and be a team leader or lead a task force or take XYZ developmental opportunities. Those can help you advance along your path to pursuing your goals. And counseling and coaching can help employees do that. Of course, sometimes when we will try to coach our employees will confide in us and share that they have some challenges or personal problems outside of work, in which case we can then refer our employees to the employee assistance programs. Most organizations in the US will have employee assistance programs which can help employees, for example, receive help from professional counselors when it comes to issues of substance abuse or marital problems or health problems or financial problems. These are not things that we want to tackle as managers, but we can definitely take this opportunity if the employee confides in us to refer our employees to the organizational employee assistance program. For coaching to be effective, it has to be timely. We need to try to provide the feedback as soon as possible after the problem behavior has occurred. So feedback, coaching should be timely. It should focus on work-related behaviors. We want to try to provide feedback on the employee's behaviors at work and how these behaviors can be corrected. So ideally, this feedback will only focus on things that the employee actually can control and can change him or herself. So we need to be very clear and very specific. Teach employees desirable behaviors to replace those problematic behaviors. And we should possibly try to articulate what are necessary actions or remedies to accomplishing desirable goals. We should not pry into employees' personal lives to try to identify personal problems. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, if employees confide in us, we can refer them to the employee assistance program. One way in which organizations frequently exchange information is through meetings. Meetings allow us to bring a large group of people together and share information. And this is, of course, essential to organizational functioning. All organizational members, all team members, All division members need to be on the same page and understand where we stand, what we have to do in order to get to where we want to go. If you remember when we discussed creativity and looked at Procter & Gamble, Procter & Gamble shared in the video, the speaker from Procter & Gamble shared the dashboard that Procter & Gamble uses to keep multiple projects updated as to where they are in their development or progress, so that any organizational members who needs to be informed can log into that dashboard and catch up and know where each project stands. And so this is a version of an organizational meeting substituted by an electronic format. In organizations, very often we will use meetings. A first decision point when we want to call a meeting is to ask ourselves very carefully, do we need to hold this meeting? I'm sure you've seen the meme, another meeting that could have been an email. Nobody likes meetings. They're very time consuming. We should not hold a meeting if the question we want to address can be solved by an email. Of course, not all meetings have functional purposes, right? Not every meeting will be called with the objective of making a decision. Sometimes meetings have symbolic purposes. For example, getting to know each other or establishing a communication style norm for the team. So different meetings can have different purposes, a functional purpose and a symbolic purpose. It's okay to call a meeting for a symbolic purpose, such as getting to know each other, establishing group norms, establishing communication norms, performance norms, things like that. But we have to have a clear need for the meeting. If there is no need, we shouldn't hold a meeting. If we can address this by an email, we should not hold a meeting. Before we call the meeting, before we start the meeting, we should have a clear agenda. And some people go as far as dedicating a certain number of minutes to each agenda item to make sure that all agenda items are covered within the timeline dedicated to the meeting. And so once we have the purpose in hand and our clear agenda, sometimes in writing and communicated to meeting members prior to the meeting, we can hold the meeting. We should start the meeting on time. Starting on time is very important because it demonstrates respect to those people who showed up on time. If we wait for people who are late, we are reinforcing undesirable behaviors. If I start the meeting late 10 minutes today because I'm waiting for people who are running behind, many people will show up to our next meeting late as well because I have established a norm. I have reinforced an undesirable behavior of not starting on time. And so it's important for us to start meetings on time and of course also end on time out of respect for people's schedules. We need to stick to the agenda. Sometimes if we have a specific amount of time dedicated to different agenda items, we might decide to table an agenda item and say we can clearly not reach a conclusion today. We will need to call a different meeting to address this point and move on to the next agenda item. We need to control the discussion. We talked about that when we discussed group decision making, how important it is to tone down very vocal, assertive members of the group and bring out more silent members to make sure that everyone participates in the discussion. We want to keep the discussion informal to encourage people to share their perspectives, their points of view. At the end of the meeting, as we prepare to close the meeting, we should summarize key points, decisions that were made, or agenda items that were tabled and need to be addressed at future meetings, and we can schedule those meetings then, before we conclude the meeting on time. After the meeting, we can share the meeting minutes or the notes from the meeting to make sure everybody is informed and to make sure that people who might not have been able to attend the meeting can catch up and be caught up to everyone else who was at the meeting. One final important form of communication is the written communication form. While we have a preference for communicating electronically through phone calls or conference calls or video conference calls, we still rely very heavily on the written word. It's very important for us to practice writing. This is why you are taking a business writing course. You will very often be judged based on how you present yourself in writing. Think about it. If a recruitment manager receives 200 resumes, he or she is going to want to work through that pile as quickly as possible. If your cover letter is full of grammatical mistakes or typos or spelling errors, you are going in the no pile. You might be a brilliant individual, but if you cannot represent yourself well in the written form, you might miss some opportunities. So it's important for us to not neglect that very important form of communication. We need to write clearly. Use an active voice. Frame your message positively. We need to use courtesy. Address people formally before you are invited to address them by their first names, especially when communicating with people in higher levels of hierarchy or people in positions of power, or communicating across cultures with cultures that are more formal than the US. US tends to be quite informal. We go to first name basis very quickly, but that is not the case in other cultures. And so you want to make sure to use courtesy, know your audience, write at a level that they would consider appropriate. Be concise. Less is more. This is why executive summaries are so popular. Nobody wants to read the whole report. Just give me the bullet points. What do I need to know? I don't want to read a 3-page email. Be concise. Tell me what I need to know, not more, not less. Reread your emails before hitting send. Emails are not text messages. Emails should not be written in conversational style. I know it's very tempting nowadays when we have dictation technology and we can just dictate to our phone and hit send, but we are more likely to write in conversational style when we do that. And so it's very important to avoid conversational style, be concise, and focus on correct writing. Grammar, spelling, punctuation. And finally, it's important for us to avoid stereotypes and avoid bias. Avoid confusing words. There are many expressions in the American version of the English language. We should not use these expressions in the written form unless we put them in quotation marks. And so make sure that when you're sending an email or a letter, you focus on clarity, proper form of address to show courtesy, keep it short and to the point, be confident but not overly assertive, focus on correct writing. Sometimes spell check does not pick everything up. It is very good to have someone else read your own work or your own letters, because very often we will not notice the mistakes that we have made. Avoid conversational style and, of course, avoid bias and stereotypes. This concludes our discussion of the chapter on communication. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.